Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with Sandra Thompson. I'm going to say the Honorable Sandra Thompson, who is Director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency. Director Thompson, nice to see you.
It's nice to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
So you are honorable. That is part of your title. I want to make it clear that because we don't often refer to you that way, do we?
No, we don't actually. I think many of the persons that go through the Senate confirmation process earn the title the honorable. So I'd like to say that I am honorable, and certainly I
And you've
really
earned
appreciate
it.
it because it's very difficult to go through that process.
I
So
I
thank you.
I bet it definitely is. So let's start with describing for people a little bit about the FHFA because I know it was sort of forged during the last financial crisis. So a lot of people are familiar with, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, not as familiar with the agency that oversees it. So maybe tell us a bit more about, the role that you play.
Sure. So, FHFA, the Federal Housing Finance Agency, is a financial regulatory agency. We have regulatory responsibilities for overseeing Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and the federal home loan banks. And the agency was formed actually through legislation that was passed after, or actually during the financial crisis in 2008, and it really brought together the financial regulatory responsibilities for entities in the mortgage sector. As you know, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were placed into conservatorship,
Mm-hmm.
which means that we actually, the government, kind of really is in charge of making sure that the policy decisions are done. We actually are really in charge of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac in a way that a regular regulatory supervisor isn't. So we've got supervisory responsibilities where we oversee the safety and soundness of these regulatory agencies, but we also have conservatorship authorities over Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, where we actually don't run the day-to-day operations, but we do have substantial oversight over many of their activities. And it's about 7 trillion, a little over 7 trillion in mortgage assets that FHFA is responsible for. So it's quite a huge responsibility.
It's interesting about your background that you're an agency that was basically forged in response to a crisis. You spent more than 2 decades at the FDIC, which we always assumed would never get into a crisis, and yet here we've seen they've had to step up with Silicon Valley Bank and such. Talk about your experience there and what that brought to you, since you're really talking about stability and you still obviously deal with them in your current role.
Yeah, so great question. I spent 23 years at the FDIC and really cut my regulatory teeth on just understanding what it means to be a financial regulator. When you are a regulator, they prevent bad things from happening, things that the public never knows about. And so it's really important. And the thing that I learned most is just seeing the opportunity to understand how important public confidence is. I've had the opportunity to work through two housing crises. I worked through the savings and loan and then the Great Recession. And the one thing that I know for sure is that it doesn't take long to lose public confidence. And when it's lost, it really takes a long time to earn it back. And when you talk about seeing just everyday people standing in lines to get their hard earned money out of banks that they're concerned about, we're seeing millions of people lose their homes,
Mm.
and just the worldwide loss of confidence in the mortgage sector that took place in 2008. It really is quite an experience, and it just drives home again, the one thing that's really important: public confidence matters most. People really want to know that their financial institutions are operated in a safe and sound manner, and that they'll have access to and be treated fairly in all of their transactions. And that's really what I bring to this role, because again, after having worked through two, banking and slash mortgage crises, the one thing that I know for sure is that public confidence is really important. And once you lose it, it's just really hard to get it back. And so we work hard every day to make sure that we don't lose the confidence that we've worked so hard to earn over the past 15 years at this agency.
It's what's fascinating about that too is, you've lived through very real crises, 2008, that breaking the buck, there was so much concern. We seem to be in a position now. I'd love to get your thoughts on we talk a lot about this lack of trust, yet the economy appears to be doing relatively well, all things considered, when you look at the crises you're talking about. What are you seeing right now in terms of both the situation with housing and mortgages? I know there's been some initiatives coming from your agency, and the trust, because things have become certainly a lot more political that I never thought would be political.
Well, the fact of the matter is, every crisis is different. And when you talk about the two crises that I mentioned, and also the pandemic that the country had to work itself through, what we're seeing now are in the housing sector in particular are some of the lessons learned from the last crisis. Like right now, people have loans that they understand and loans that they can afford. The issue that is upon us now is really some of the changes in the economy. Is a very volatile economy. During the pandemic, we saw home prices rise at historic levels. We saw interest rates decline at historic levels. We had record low interest rates. We had record high home prices, and we have a supply issue that really exacerbates the two things that we've just talked about. We've got a lot of uncertainty in our macroeconomic conditions around this country. And I do believe that all of the regulators are working together, again, to make sure that there's financial stability in the system, that we apply some of the lessons learned from the prior crisis so that the same issues don't take place. And I'll tell you, when we went through the pandemic, all of the regulators got together, and the housing regulators in particular, we meet once a week to talk about loss mitigation strategies and really try to figure out what is going to work for the American people and what's going to work quickly. The situation that we see upon us today, the regulators got together and made some decisions that I think really went a long way to calm the public in terms of the banking sector and the financial sector generally. I think that
You're talking about Silicon Valley Bank, right?
Excuse me?
You're talking about the Silicon Valley Bank situation, Director Thompson, right?
Yeah, well, not just that. There were two bank failures that weekend, but certainly making sure that there was confidence in the financial sector was at the forefront of, I think, all of the regulators, just in terms of the policy response. And I do think that, the public confidence in the sector is something that, we don't take lightly, and want to make sure that everything that we do works towards that end. Because at the end of the day, we're all public servants. And that's who we serve. And we have to make policy decisions that impact the people that we serve, not just some people, but all people. And I do think that really is what matters most.
You mentioned the housing regulators. I'd be remiss not to point out that there are now 4 women in the role, you being one of them in major roles. Does that make a difference to you? You've worked in other leadership roles where it hasn't been all women.
That's a great question. And I really will just think about the people that are in the position now. Secretary Fudge, President Elena McCargo, Commissioner Julia Gordon. This really is a historic moment. And, it really is an honor to serve, and it's an honor to really serve the housing sector with these phenomenal women who really know the sector inside and out. They have long time service, and they really are committed to the housing sector. And I'll tell you, who better than women to lead the charge, and especially minority women closing the racial homeownership gap, taking on some of the systemic barriers to equitable housing finance that have really held back generations of people that came before us. Women are born leaders and natural problem solvers. Secretary Fudge, Commissioner Gordon, President McCargo, and I all have similar backgrounds that I think have really primed us to be and to serve in this historic moment. And I'm just thrilled. I do feel that some of the obstacles that I'm sure that we've all faced in this male-dominated industry have given us a tenacity and drive to complete this critical work. And I think that all of us are advocates for change. So I'm just really honored to serve with these women.
Well,
I can't say enough good things about them. I think, we're each uniquely qualified to champion, equity and affordability and sustainability on behalf of all communities, especially those that are underserved, across the country. And as I said before, again, we're all public servants and we serve the country, not just some people, but all people.
Well,
and I think that you'll get that commitment from these ladies that are in charge of
it sounds
the
like
housing sector.
it sounds like you enjoy their company. I'm curious because you've had the experience of being the only, whether it's the only woman in the room, the only woman of color in a room, and we talk about how the tone changes when you get a critical mass. And here you're now experiencing where you're getting a critical mass. Does it feel different? I mean, do you find that things get done quicker, or that there is an enjoyment factor? Because we rarely actually see this in practice, to actually have all of the leaders be women. And you've been
that's
that
a
chair.
great question. And I just see a lot of collaboration. We work together, we like each other. And when we get together, it's how can we help? What can I do? What do you need? How can we address this issue? What can I provide? How can we work together collaboratively to address some of these issues in the housing sector? It is really a collaboration amongst people who have a similar goal. We want to make a difference. We want to work together to make that difference. And we want to make sure that it sticks. Sustainability is really important, because what's the point of us making a change that only lasts, at this point in time? We want to make sure that, we are championing equity and affordability and sustainability. These aren't just issues that impact underserved families. These are issues that impact everybody across this country. You talk about affordability, college students getting out of college. It's really hard to afford or be a first-time home buyer. And it's also challenging from a rental perspective, because we've seen also record increases in rents. And so
I'm in New York City. I know that all too well, I think. One of the things that seems to be an unfortunate legacy of the 2008 crisis is that the people who perhaps were seen as having risky credit were almost vilified and blamed, blamed for, they were initially blamed for the subprime mortgage crisis, even though I now know there's very different interpretations of what caused that, as you know. But is that linger? Because even in terms of the reaction to the kinds of initiatives that you're trying to put in place to make it easier for people who don't have good credit to buy, what's the pushback you're getting, and what's the response you have?
I'll first say that buying a home is one of the most complicated financial transactions that many, if not most people, will make. When you think about the documentation that a borrower has to supply, the process that you have to go through with, getting an appraisal, and the underwriting process where everybody always needs more information, and getting to the closing table where you've got to sign all these documents, because it's the biggest asset that many people will own. And so just having a good understanding of what you're doing, what are the financial ramifications and impacts on your household. It's more than getting a house, it's staying in the house. And that was one of the larger lessons learned in the 2008 crisis, where people had loans they didn't understand, loans they couldn't afford, and they were more focused on getting into the house. And we're more focused on getting them in, but keeping them there. Because we saw in 2008 a record number of foreclosures, people getting in their homes, losing their homes because they couldn't make these balloon payments, or the interest rates change, which made the payments change. And so it was just quite difficult. So really enhancing understanding of the responsibilities of owning a home once you get it, making sure that you've got some reserves for the hot water heater or the refrigerator or whatever can go wrong, I think is really important. And that goes to, financial literacy, but specifically, what does this mean to a person who buys a house? What is the financial obligation long term? And so we are really trying to focus not just on the affordability, but on the sustainability. And so one of the things that I'd say in terms of pushback is when you think about the amount of money it takes to have a down payment, that's really important. But a lot of people have down payments, but then they don't have savings after they buy the home. And so just trying to figure out what that trade-off is between having more money down versus more in reserves, so that if something happens after you purchase the home, you can actually fix it without disruption to your mortgage payment. And so again, I think that it's a real great opportunity now with all of us in place who really care about people who don't understand many of these transactions. One, how to purchase the home, and two, how to stay in the home, and three, if you get in trouble, what options do you have? Because that again can be complicated. And so we just think that the home buying process is important. We're focused on, financial education and financial literacy in this regard, and also just working with counselors and others to make sure that people understand this huge financial commitment that they're undertaking.
And I want to get to a little bit about you, but before that, I want to ask one other question with regard to your predecessor. Does it make a difference which administration is in charge for your role, given the oversight nature of it? Does it feel like a more apolitical role, or does it really make a profound difference who's in charge?
So we FHFA is an independent agency,
right?
And I've worked at FDIC. I mentioned I worked there 23 years. I worked for both Republicans and Democrats. Here at FHFA, I worked here for 10 years, and I just really have the blessing of being a career civil servant who got an opportunity to serve as the head of an agency. So I've worked for both Republican directors of FHFA, and I've worked for Democratic representatives or heads of FHFA. And I can tell you what they care about. The one thing that is consistent is that, again, this public confidence and just making sure that we're meeting the mission. That was true in 2013 when I got here. There was a fire. People were very late on their mortgages, and we had all kinds of loss mitigation programs like HAMP and HARP. It was true in 2015, where we're still trying to figure out why people had not refinanced, that had these really high interest mortgages with high interest rates. And it was also true during the pandemic that what every director has his or her own priorities, but at the end of the day, we are public servants, and we all take that oath very seriously. I know I do. And so again, we really want to work with the public to make sure that people have safe, decent, and affordable housing. And I think that's true during my experience at FHFA.
So other question is now a personal one for you, Director Thompson, which is you have been in many leadership roles. I'm curious, first of all, what you wanted to be when you grew up, but what motivates you? What do you think makes you a strong leader? I know that's never a question that people feel comfortable answering necessarily, but um, I'm going to ask it anyway. So let's start with what you went to Howard University. What did you see yourself doing?
So when I went to Howard, I actually started in high school. I wanted to be an accountant. And when I went to Howard, I was a finance major and then an insurance minor. So I wanted to be an accountant and an actuarial science. It was really
For
interesting, but it
stability, was
really
that for
started.
stability, or you love numbers?
Um, I really liked math and I like numbers, but I found over the years that I like people and numbers and just this whole balance of, doing something that really makes a difference. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and in this particular job, and in some of the jobs that I've had previously, I've had the opportunity to really learn how to have a sense of community, how to persevere, to be dedicated, how to survive in different environments, and really how to make the most of and appreciate some of the things that I've had. I do know very well how to deal with different types of people. Like I'm comfortable in different environments because I've had to deal with people, through my entire life with different backgrounds, different income levels, different points of view, whether it's political or just, you disagree on anything. And what I learned is that everybody counts. And I do think that I'm fair but firm. I know how to fall down because I've fallen down plenty. But most importantly, I really do know how to get back up. But what's important to me is just really trying to figure out how to treat all people with dignity and respect. And those are some life lessons that I really believe brought me to serving in leadership roles throughout my career. It is important to really understand that it's policy making isn't like a one size fits all, like everybody isn't the same. And then when you make a decision in Washington, it's so interesting. You have to understand the impact of that decision on people around the country because rural communities are different than urban communities. The ways of living are just different, depending on where you live and what community you live in. And so just trying to make good policy decisions, but understanding impacts on various communities is really, really important to me. And I think that that's true in the workplace as well, because you've got different people from different backgrounds. And so people bring their point of view, they bring who they are to their positions and to different decisions that have to be made.
I
And
love
just
that.
taking all that into consideration, I think is really important. And just again, it all comes down to treating people with dignity and respect. It's just as simple as that.
Yeah.
And that applies to policy making. It just applies to life.
I love it. No, I mean, we always talk about what the private sector can teach the public sector, but there's so much that working in the public sector could teach the private sector, frankly. But that's a conversation for another day. Final question for you, Director Thompson, which is there are a lot of people out there who feel very demoralized and feel cut off to some extent from the American dream, that American dream being home ownership right now because interest rates have gone up, housing prices remain high. What's your message to them?
Hold on. This is a priority for all of us who are in charge of housing. One of the biggest challenges that keeps me up at night is affordability. And as you said, these increases in home prices, interest rates, combined with just high inflation and other supply shortages are really having a tremendous impact on affordability. And you think about it, if it was during a regular economic environment, we certainly would point out some of the strains that are caused or created, on certain groups such as renters or low income borrowers and first time home buyers. But again, this is everybody. This is middle income buyers. These are people that are trying to move from their first house to the second house. And they're like, oh, we can get a great price for the house we have, but where are we going to go? And so this is an issue that we are working on. I tell people to hold on and just be patient. We are trying to work through these affordability issues. We want to figure out ways that, we can support workforce housing. You should be able to live where you work. You shouldn't have to, work in one city and live in a whole nother city that's miles and miles away just because you're trying to find affordable housing. Looking at housing that can, support, service employees like our first responders, government workers, teachers, medical personnel. These just aren't normal times. And everybody, like you said, people are encountering difficulties, and it's just difficult. But what I would say is just please hold on. We are really working hard to try to address these issues and really try to figure out a way that can provide solutions for everyone.
I wish you luck, and I thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity.
Of course.